to our podcast, Deep Listening with Aiko and Aisha. We are two friends, both immigrants. I came from Japan when I was 18. Aisha came from Pakistan when she was 6. We're going to be exploring the mysteries and intricacies of listening in our podcast. We'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and leave your comments. For today's podcast is titled Listening Without an Agenda. We begin by talking about co-counseling and the model of listening it offers, and we let the conversation go where it needs to go. Along the way, we touch on some questions like, how do we listen to others without having an agenda? What can we do to not feel like we have to fix others? Why do we have the need to give suggestions? What makes it hard to listen to people in a deep way? What does it mean to listen to another person? What are you listening for when you listen to another person? So I hope you enjoy it. And I just want to warn you that the audio quality of today's conversation is not very great. But as we continue this podcast series, we're hoping to bring up the sound quality. So please be patient for the time being. Thank you.
Hi, Aiko.
Hi, Aisha. I'm good. How are you?
I am doing pretty good. This is a very engaging topic, listening.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really, at the moment, I feel like saying I can't think of anything more important than listening, whatever that means. And maybe today we can go into what does that mean,
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe you have some questions and we can talk a little bit today.
Right. Well, so you and I in the past, we've been friends for a long time. I know that you have gotten into what's called co-counseling.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, when I had problems, issues, difficulties, I would call you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember one year you told me a little bit about co-counseling and how, if I was interested in trying that. And I'm like, okay, great. So we would take, 10 minutes, 15 minutes each, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we listen to each other. And I thought I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I'm really grateful for that experience. I mean, we still do it,
Yeah.
But I remember that one point I was having a lot of difficulties and, being able to have somebody listening to me was helpful.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of curious if you can tell me a little bit about what you went through, like how you found this co-counseling and, what you did. And I don't know if you had any, training that was involved, or can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, maybe I'll just share. So interestingly enough, I found co-counseling over 20 plus years ago. And the person who recommended co-counseling to me was my singing teacher.
Oh.
I was taking voice lessons
Mm-hmm.
from this guy, Todd. And he actually also recommended this book called The Listening Book, which I listed in our document here. But so then I forget how he introduced it to me, but I took a class, and basically there's a lot of different things I could say about it, about counseling or reevaluation counseling community and everything like that. But the simplest thing about the listening piece is that, we're not used to truly being listened to.
Right.
You and I have talked about that, and most people know that, and it's a popular word. And I feel like there's more consciousness now than ever before about the importance of listening. I think people are getting that. And there's a lot of different modalities that try to train you on listening. But there's nothing this kind of miraculous to be listened to. It's like I always say that there's hundreds of modalities, thousands of healing modalities out there. The key factor commonality between all these modalities is being present with another human being, being witnessed by another human being. So what co-counseling does is basically you do listening pairs, listening partners, and you learn to listen to each other, and there's a sense of exchange, mutual exchange. In some relationships, some people are used to doing all the listening and some people are used to all the talking, and there's power dynamics between people and people's patterns and styles and everything like that. So to kind of balance that out, there's this idea of less exchange time. And it was also about you don't need to go to a therapist, you just need to be with another human being and listen and be listened to. And you exchange that. So that's the basic tenet of or I don't know, tenet is the right word, but the basic skeleton of the listening practice of co-counseling. There's a lot more. It's a community with a lot of focus on social justice kind of stuff. But at the heart is this sort of idea that everybody, when they're listened to, you can recover from whatever it is that's troubling you. So there's a lot more to the theory, which I don't know if I want to go into right now. But let's just say that we all get hurt by many layers of hurt from God knows where you say you started before lifetimes. Co-counseling doesn't necessarily talk about that, but like birth throughout our lifetime, we are censored and criticized and hurt and abused, and there's different things that happen to different people, and the way you take shock and trauma, and it's different for each person. And in that is you formulate patterns, recordings, literal recordings of the things that happen to you. Like you take on beliefs and you take on thoughts and you take on feelings, and your thinking shuts down. It's not as clear as it was if you didn't get hurt. You just get, you're almost like parts of you kind of get frozen. And so when somebody listens to you, they give an opportunity for you to walk through that process and heal yourself, like be seen. And it's a process. I mean, depending on how seriously you take it on. In the last few years, I've taken it on very seriously for myself because I'm really trying to work through some early traumas that I've experienced. So another really important piece about counseling is that the body has a natural healing process. It looks like shaking and crying and laughing and sweating and yawning. I think, there's other things too, of course, but those are some things that like co-counseling has emphasized. And when you are being listened to, those release mechanisms come up. So you might laugh, you might cry, you might shake. And those are signs that you're letting go of something. You're letting go of. So if you start laughing and I've made a joke, it might be you're laughing off embarrassment, I'm not just talking about you in particular, but in general. Or if I'm talking about my body and I suddenly start yawning, you might be because I'm getting more oxygen, I'm relaxing deeper, and my body's yawning more. Crying, if I start talking about something that's painful for me and I feel like you're really listening, I might start crying. So yeah, and sweating, if you're talking about something scary or crying too, you might sweat too, different things like that. So I feel like the better you are at dealing with your own struggles, like doing your process, like being listened to. So if I'm being listened to and I'm doing my work, the more I do my work, the better listener I become for others. And I think primarily what can get in the way of listening to other people, besides having so much of your own emotional things coming up, is that you need to feel like you have to do something, or you have to do something right or good. And those thoughts are also distractions from being present. So the goal is just to be present. And that's usually the biggest healing balm for anyone. And I will say one other thing, that the co-counseling talks about contradiction. Contradiction is anything that So you say something happened to you and you were frightened and somebody was humiliating you, for example. The contradiction to that might be one, our connection, my tone of voice. It's as kind and present. Contradiction could be in what I say, depending on what you say. And I think, you know what? I care so much about you. I promise you will never hear a word of humiliation from me. You know, so I just, it's all about contradicting, kind of changing the pattern. The pattern believes something, the pain, the trauma, the distress believes something. So you want to be the person who doesn't believe that, who sees the other side of that, who sees the healing side of that. So and sometimes contradiction is to take something lightly when the person feels so heavy about it, you know. And sometimes, like, I mean, you could talk about serious topics and you make light of them, but without the other person feeling criticized. You know, it's a relationship. There's another thing, there's no shortcut to building relationships, you know, friendships, period, right? I mean, sometimes you meet somebody and you're like, and you're the fastest friend, but there's a trust building process. And in any relationship, there's a trust building process, and you show up and you're consistent and you do what you say and you listen. That builds trust in that relationship, and each person can then do more work. I have sessions sometimes where I just go right into deep crying because I trust myself. I've done a lot of work, and I know that person can handle me just crying without me telling the story. I'm just releasing. So I just need somebody to help me do that. In fact, last night I was feeling really bad and I talked to someone for 15 minutes. I just cried the whole time. I said a couple of words here or there, Does that give you a sense?
So, the word co-counseling.
Yeah.
Like, when I think of the word counseling, you kind of want the other person's feedback, right? Or
therapy, are you thinking?
Yeah. So, like, when they say counseling, does that involve anything other than just listening, or?
That's a good question. And I would say that in its basic form, it involves nothing else. Like, you listen, and you listen so well that you can show the other person something different from what they're saying, right? Like, for example, you might just, my presence, my kind presence might just be enough. But if it's not, I might say something reassuring or kind out loud, or I might, depending on a relationship, I might hold your hand. I might give you a hug, whatever. It sort of depends. And then when you get into counseling, there's like theories about oppression and you know how we all have identities. I'm Pakistani and I was raised Muslim and I'm a woman and I was a young person once and I was raised in middle class kind of environment. So all of those things, there's layers of patterns and thinking patterns that we learn around those, and we get hurt because of the certain things, So you can, there's theories about that, like about how different groups of people get hurt. Like, for example, maybe there's counselors in Japan and there's probably a lot of work around the Holocaust, the nuclear Holocaust, right? Or what happened to it. In all of our cultures, we have different relationship to how women get treated. And Pakistan has its own brand of craziness around the treatment of women, and Japan has its own brand of craziness around treatment of women. So there's a kind of ways that you learn all of that if you're part of the community and you go to workshops and things like that. But this basic, where you and I are listening, and basically I take a class and I co-counsel with people who do co-counseling or in the community, but I also counsel with people that aren't in the community. I just basically share the same principles and I listen to people. So to me, that's co-counseling, if you want to call it. It's listening, if you want to call it. It's this basic, and then everybody needs it and everybody should do it. And so,
when we were trying that co-counseling some years ago, I found it sometimes really difficult, for me to just listen, because I have a deep desire to fix others, right? A mom, I want to make sure everything is fine. I don't want Aisha to, feel this way, or it makes me feel uncomfortable when she's sad,
Right.
fearful. It was a very good experience for me because I realized that it can be very difficult for me to just sit and listen to what you have to say without feeling like I want to help you.
Yeah.
When the best thing to do is to just really be there and listening. Right?
Yeah. It's profound.
I mean, in your experience when you were starting out, did you have any experience like that where you really had to tell yourself to?
Yeah, I don't know that I had the strong impulse to fix other people or give advice, but I had really busy mind, So, I would have maybe more judgments and I would feel insecure about my role and I would want to try to do something more or I'd try harder, There was more effort in it. And now, because of my own healing power, I recognize the power of presence in listening to someone and connecting. So there's not just it's connecting with that letting that other person know that you're there. And that's a process, Some people it can be simple as touching their hand and saying, hey, but some people are blocked and shut out. So it's gonna take a long time before their relationship evolves to the place that they can really see that you're present with them, depends on their degree of being able to be present or my own degree. So that's where I've gotten stuck. For some reason I'm not, although, this is an interesting thing. I do get in that trap when I'm not doing counseling. So if I'm not counseling, like I do counseling with my sister too, right? And so when I'm in a counseling mode, I'll listen to her. But when I'm outside the counseling mode, I will give her ideas and advice. And I don't think she minds it because we kind of agree in a way, or my worry about things come up. So I'm concerned about things. So I have to make a conscious decision each time. So in other words, I can easily go there to giving advice. So I'm going to take that back. I don't know. I think I just follow the rule of not giving advice. So if I'm in a co-counseling, I'll just not do that. But if I'm a friend, I'll just kind of jump between the two. But, even with you and me, you and I will listen and then we'll go on to suggesting things and, it'll just be a back and forth. So I have to be conscious about which mode I want to be in. What this points to is interesting that if I've thought about this myself, how could I always be in that mode? Because I think listening is more important than giving advice. Because this is what Byron Katie always says too. He's like, who are you to think you know better than this person? Like she doesn't say in those words, but she says something that, it's like it's almost like insulting, like how would I know what this other person really needs? And on the flip side, when someone tells me in advice and gives me advice, especially in sessions, or I'm like, I can go into my feeling and go. And sometimes when counselors have had the need to feel important to me or say something, it actually interferes with my process. And it distracts me because it's about them. It's not about me. If they're just present and listening, that's all I need. I didn't need to interject. They felt like they had to do something, help her, so they're trying to think and say something, but the presence is really more important.
Yeah. Well, not just when we were doing the counseling, you and I, but I think I'm lucky because when I think about all the friends I have around me, they don't know about co-counseling maybe, but they're really good at listening.
Yeah, nice.
And I feel fortunate, because there are people who want to intervene and say, no, don't think like that, or let me suggest you something, blah blah blah. And if they are good suggestions, I actually like that. But oftentimes I just forget how nice it is to be just listened to, like you were saying earlier. Even though I have, like, a lot of my friends know how to listen to me, those are just a handful of people. And outside of that group, I think I feel uncomfortable when I talk to people. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I don't want to indulge, or I don't want to like bother people. I don't want them to spend all this time just listening to me. I don't feel comfortable being listened to. But I guess with you, with my friends, I just assume that they're there for me.
Mhm.
And then it allows me to start speaking, saying what I want to say.
Mhm. Mhm.
And, I'm just basically saying it's interesting how much people really need to be listened to.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
But that it can be sometimes uncomfortable because a person might not be used to being heard or listened to. Awkward. I have I don't know if you want to say something, but I have a few other
Yeah,
questions.
yeah, go for it.
So when you are co-counseling and then you're listening, you kind of mentioned about judgment,
Mhm, mhm,
right? So we're all humans, and we might be co-counseling with somebody who have very different views,
mhm, mhm,
world or whatever you're
mhm,
talking about, and
mhm.
and then there's the judgment coming up, and so you notice yourself, and if that judgment comes up, but I guess you're just there, you're committed to be listening to
Mhm.
this
Yeah,
person,
yeah.
right? So how, I mean, do you have any experience, like can you tell me a little bit about when you felt that and how you responded to yourself of that judgment?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I mean, I wonder, I'm trying to look back at what my original experience was. I think, I think sometimes you have to, in the beginning, I probably faked it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I faked listening because I had a judgment, or I just like let what's the word? My mind got distracted or had this judgment. There's a billion judgments that go through our mind, as you know, right? Like it's like the mind is always judging. The hair looks that way, the voice sounds this way. This, it's always noticing something that's not the focus, right? So there's that piece of judgment. But if somebody's talking and I have a judgment about what they're sharing, that sometimes can be tricky.
Yeah.
So you have to know how much of a feelings you have about that. If you
Mhm.
have too many feelings, you can like say, I don't really have attention for this right now. You know, you might, for example, have it with your child. I'm talking about something different. You can just say, I don't have attention for it right now, but maybe a little later, or one after I process some of this, or something like this. But with people that are new to you or strangers or something like that, I think you just kind of go for it. You just do your best.
Mhm.
But that said, for me, between that and counseling and my understanding of nonviolent communication and my understanding of projection and my understanding of the work of Byron Katie, I know that judgments are just tools for me to look at myself.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
if I have a judgment about somebody, or I fear judgment about them, thinking judging thoughts about me, because that happens. So lately, I've been talking to people, different counselors, and I end up talking. They're talking about things that are not I don't agree with necessarily, like about COVID,
Mhm.
right? So I just listen to them
Mhm.
and acknowledge that they're feeling scared, or acknowledge that, listen respectfully. But I haven't had the wherewithal to, I don't share my judgments,
Mhm.
and I don't, and I mean, I've taken me a while to share my own point of view.
Mhm.
So it makes me, my judgments make me scared of sharing my own point of view. With, like, I could also counsel and talk about how it's driving me crazy that everybody's so scared, and, yada, yada, yada. And the vaccination's a bad idea and it's a horrible thing. And but I don't necessarily go there because I do need to process it, but I process it with you or my husband or my sister, somebody who has more attention for that.
Mhm.
I trust more, like, because I trust that they won't, because you share some of my opinion, I'm not I scared. So I kind of have that. that thing. So I don't know if I can say it any more succinctly, but I think it's just that I recognize that the more work I do, the quieter my mind gets. But regardless, if I have judgment, it's for me to look at where I have some struggles still that I need to look at.
Mm-hmm.
My judgments are only a sign that I have some work to do. And I have a lot of work to do because I judge all the time.
That's just natural.
Yeah, it's human piece. You know what I mean? Like the judgment's there, but I don't listen to them as guiding my direction necessarily.
Right.
Or action. I know that I have things to work through, and I know you have things to work through, and the basis of my interactions with you is going to, as much as I can have some control over it, is going to be uh, openness and loving and respectful. So I'm just going to do that. That I trust that more than I trust judgment.
Right.
Judgments, as Byron Katie says, are just like children that you have to pay attention to,
Right.
on paper, but you don't have to listen to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really feel like that you and I doing the co-counseling, I mean, it was your offer. You said
yeah
something like this. I think that was really the turning point for me to really start thinking about, what does it mean to have a conversation with people. Like sometimes you're the listener, the other person speaking, and then now I'm speaking. And I started to become very conscious. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm just like talking and talking and talking. And then, but before I might have not been conscious, right? Now I'm conscious. And then I have another friend, she's a great listener. And I'm just talking and talking. And then I guess I'm talking because she's such a good listener. Then I become self-conscious.
Yeah.
I want to be like her. I want to be able to just really take in, listen to what other people are saying. And
is she good at herself, forthcoming with her own thoughts, or does she share openly about herself?
She does. She studied psychology or something like that. So I mean, she's just sort of, she seems very grounded, and she's a very good listener.
Yeah. I notice sometimes that we have fear of taking up space.
Mm-hmm.
We only tolerate so much of talking ourselves, and then we censor ourselves, like, oh, I'm taking too much time. But yeah, when other people are really present with us, and it's beautiful if you have that kind of trust that you don't censor yourself that way, that you trust that I can talk as long as I want, and then but I found it useful to have that pair thing, it's exchanging time, because I might not originally have taken up too much space, and because I've had fear of taking up space, and because sometimes I do feel like in certain dynamics, I'll sometimes feel like, oh, I want to, the person's talking too much. I have that thought too.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's not because they're talking too much, it's because I have that issue.
Mm-hmm.
I was just talking to you earlier about the coaching call that I'm listening to, and they talk a lot. And I thought, well, I'm actually learning from what they're saying, and so I don't really mind it, but why do I have this judgment about them talking too much and not kind of liking that approach a little bit? Like they should do more Q&A, and they should be more like give and take, and they shouldn't assume things. So I think there's some goodness to that thought about my own, but I also think it's about this hiding thing that I do. I'm afraid to take up space. I mean, look at this whole podcast business is about trying to take up space. I have something to say, and I want to say it in the world. I want others to listen to me. I don't want to be always listening to other people. Like I don't want to be the consumer all the time, and so I think I need to grow in that direction. That's why we're doing this, in my mind, is our friendship and creativity, but it's also, I want to grow. I want to stop saying I have nothing to offer, or I don't say that exactly, but I'm insecure about what I have. Like, I'm not really sure what I have to offer is more like what I say, I'm really not sure what it's listening, but it's also speaking.
Right.
It's being willing to share and be vulnerable and open. You
Mhm.
need both, right? You can't do one without the other.
Right.
In a, listening to other human being type of conversation. So
Mhm.
you need the other person willingness to be heard and speak.
Mhm.
And it just really reminds me of how that is in life, right? Where we sometimes emphasize one thing, but you realize you need a dynamic. It's not either or.
Mhm.
It's a relationship
Yes.
between
Yes.
parts.
I guess, when you are on that listener side, it always helps to have this intention that we're having this conversation not to prove, who's right, who's wrong, but really being open and listen to what the other person has to say.
Yeah.
And there's no, best scenario, you just have that openness, right? Okay, I'm here to listen, which puts the other person in a safe place,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's really depends on the situation, like you're saying. If you're talking to your sister, or somebody who is really needing your advice or something, then that the situation is different. But other times you realize that the person just wants to talk, the person wants to just express, and then you go, okay, I'm just going to create this space for that person to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, do you ever, while you're listening or doing co-counseling, do you ever ask the person, after listening to whatever he or she said, do you ever ask the person, like, well, do you want to hear what I think, or do you need any advice, or do you ever say things like that? Or
Mostly no.
okay.
I might in more friendship things,
Mm,
or just offer,
yeah.
just offer some thought.
Mhm,
I think I do that with you and a few other. I'm not naming names, but a friend of ours, you both here too, and then yeah, my sis,
mhm.
you know.
Yeah. And then, of course, if the other person said, do you have any feedback, or what do you think about this, or can you give me feedback? Then
Yeah, if somebody asks me for something, or what do you think? Yeah, I'll, you know, I have one, I think it sort of depends on the relationship sometimes,
Mhm.
but, we sometimes do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think in counseling in particular, there's been a very clear boundaries, because once you cross into friendship and giving advice, then it gets more complicated,
Right.
life. So, of course you do that in friendship and partnerships and everything like that. But in this, if you're developing a long-term co-counseling relationship with somebody, that is helpful to kind of keep it very clean,
Mhm.
just focus and not give advice, because I'm thinking, well, who is she to give me advice? Or what does she think of? Why does she say that to me? So it makes it less complicated.
Mhm.
But I do in friendships, I think. I also have learned to say, well, when somebody said, what do you think? I said, well, what do you think? Because it's really important for each of us to trust our own thinking.
Mhm.
So there might be a temptation in me to want to give advice, but I also want to acknowledge the importance of trusting and helping other people to trust themselves.
Mhm.
So what do you think? Because a lot of times we're used to deferring,
Mhm.
but as a woman or as a woman of color or whatever, you defer instead of take in your rightful authority, rightful knowing. What do you think? I do that kind of bullshit with my husband quite a bit, just as a habit.
Outside of the co-counseling, like, you're talking about your friend, your sister, husband, you notice, like, sometimes people will will want to talk, and people want you to be listening, but they also want you to give advice, right? People might not say, what do you think, or what do you think I should
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
But you can kind of tell that the person is bringing it up because that person doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that, I mean, it's a guesswork, but sometimes you can tell. If you feel, so this is outside of co-counseling, if you're listening and then you can just sense that the person wants your opinion, or that person wants you to help her,
Yeah.
how would you approach that?
Yeah. So I have another friendship that I talk to, and I listen to her. I don't know if we really call it. I mean, I think I've talked about co-counseling with her for sure. Yeah, I have. But but we don't really measure the time so much, and I listen. Uh, um, I listen for insight too,
Mm-hmm.
so I can offer something that's truly helpful and respectful. Um, but I think if it's just somebody stranger, I think it had to be a case by case basis. I think, like you said, if I intuited that they wanted some advice or something or an idea, I said, well, here, I would recommend you try the work of Byron Katie, like something like that or whatever, if that was it. Um, I, I can't really think of an example offhand. I think the temptation, like I said, to offer advice or give opinions is much more easy when you don't have the boundaries or the structure of counseling, co-counseling, peer counseling. So I would probably go ahead and do it if I sensed it. But
Yeah.
I also would try to, if it depends on who it was, if I could tell they were just asking it out of insecurity, I might go back to them and say, what do you think?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think you know the answer. What do you think? Right. But if they just wanted my advice for something,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm having trouble with this relationship. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Um, if I have time to listen to them and I can say, tell me more and I'll listen. But if I don't, I might say, I might give some advice.
When you are present for the other person, and in a very authentic way,
Mhm.
not just pretending, I think that the person who's speaking, being listened to, something must shift,
Mm.
right? And
Yeah.
afterwards, maybe that person kind of look back on what he or she was saying, and then things might clarify for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I noticed when you were talking though, I two examples came to mind so when I have difficulties listening, so I feel like I can do pretty good with listening, but I notice two places where I do get stuck sometimes. One is when somebody's very much in a victim place where
Right.
they're insisting on blaming somebody, like
Yeah.
they're angry at somebody, and not just anger itself, but they're like fixated on fixing that person.
Yeah.
They're not looking at themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So in counseling, you have a way to do that. Especially if you know the person and they know counseling well enough, you deflect it by kind of going to say, "What's early
Mhm.
about this? What does this remind you of?"
Mhm.
So you kind of get them thinking about, did you ever get treated that way when you were young, or you ask questions to help them separate from that moment and kind of go to early,
Mhm.
because most of our distresses are from early. They're
Mhm.
not really about this current situation. They're just so intense because this early thing happened, and you learn to deal with it in a certain way, and you're usually scared or something. So I can kind of move out of that. That's one way I deal with this situation in a counseling situation. But another place I really get tripped up all the time is with my own son. Kind of wanting to listen to him. I want to fix his problems. That's probably my own. He'll be, especially if he says it in his. If he came to me and said, "Mom, I just want to cuddle up with you, and I'm sad," I can do that. But when he's complaining about something, and adamant that he knows the situation. I want to fix it. I want to problem solve. Yeah, I have a hard time just settling and being receptive. So, and that's so typical for all of us, right? Like our kids and our partners are the hardest pieces that we have to deal with, because we have so much invested in it. We have agendas in those relationships. You know what I mean? Our egos are very much tied to like how well my son is doing. It's a reflection of me, and it causes me pain, and it is a lot more invested in that. But I've learned a few things, and I am better at it than I used to be. With high emotion, like I have a hard time with that.
Yeah. I think what you were saying, I don't know, I start to think while you were talking.
Yeah.
But I wasn't listening to you. But the part of the reason why some people are hesitant about going to see a counselor, therapist, is maybe the fact that they're afraid that, the therapist is going to say, oh, you're wrong, you should be doing this, that, right? And they're afraid that they're not going to be just heard without, these other stuff. Like if they felt like they can go somewhere where they can just say what they need to say and be heard, I think they would go to those places more.
Yeah.
Right? It's like people always say, well, thanks for listening to me.
Right.
How many times you hear that? I think we all crave for that, right? These people, they're all desiring that safe place to be heard. That's huge.
It is huge. Because you see, that's what I think all of this craziness on people ranting and social media, whether TikTok or Instagram, it's being heard and seen. And people just craving that. Somebody.
That confession thing, the Catholic confession.
Yeah.
So I was not brought up religiously at all, but and different friends of mine, and even myself, I think in the past kind of ridiculed that kind of I don't know, do you call that ritual? Like confession, right? You go to a place and I don't know, that was so foreign to me. But now I just feel like there's a lot of good in that, right? You just go there and you speak, you're being heard. And then it's kind of like a release.
Yeah, and you're being accepted, like there's and the burdens that people have to share with another. That just reminds me of like how important it is for each human being to have at least one other human being. That can hold them. Like, I don't mean literally, but literally as well, but more metaphorically, I mean, like that that there's a safety in their life, that they could just say whatever and do whatever, and obviously within reason, is like and not murder or something. But I think it's funny. My son is a few years ago. You'd ask him, well, what would you do if I did this? If I killed somebody? If I did this or that? It's kind of like trying to get at what would be the thing that would make me cut myself off from him. And I said, you know what? Do nothing. And I wouldn't necessarily agree with what you did, but I can't think of anything that would,
Wow.
Different ideas on what would make me turn away from him. And it's so funny because in my own healing process, that's been the one thing I've been looking for, a place where I can rest. That didn't get that feeling growing up, and that I was safe for me to have my full mind and have my full expression. And even if I thought really differently from the people who loved me and were around me, I wouldn't be rejected from the tribe. I think I felt deep fear of being rejected from the tribe, and never really held. So That's been a kind of a very slow but deep process for me
Yeah.
to create that sense of holding in my life.
As you talk about that, I'm feeling like there is some sense of freedom in just letting somebody speak, and then, me just listening and not feel like I have to say something. Sometimes when I'm talking to people and then I sense that I want to say something, like I have an opinion or something, right? And then I notice myself wanting to say something,
Mm.
my opinion about it. And then I catch myself and I go, ooh, what if I just let that go? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I remember many times I feel like, wow, this is so freeing,
Mhm, mhm,
you know,
mhm.
that I can just listen and then not feeling like I have to say anything, or not that I have to say anything, right? It's just that it's okay that I don't have to say anything.
Yeah,
There's a sort of almost sense of relief or freedom in it.
yeah, yeah.
And that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is an interesting thing, and I think, like you and I both, during this conversation, we both had thoughts, right, come through, and it was like, okay, I will note that, I have to say it, but to realize that, what if that thought we never shared, or what if it gets lost, and so what, right? Like, it's like it. And in groups too, what if it gets lost and you didn't say this important point, but oftentimes somebody else will pick that thought up. It'll just be said. You don't have to be the one to always deliver that thought. But if I forget something, it's
Mhm.
okay. You know, like, okay, all right. And I think as I've gotten older, I've also had a little bit of issues with. And I don't think this is a healthy thing, but I've seen like the last couple of years, last year especially, had a little bit of issue with short-term memory. And so I'll think of something, but by the end of the sentence or two sentences, I've forgotten what I was gonna
Yeah.
hold it anymore. And so I have to let go, because
Mhm.
otherwise I'm gonna feel bad, like something's missing.
Yeah.
But I actually thought about, maybe that's actually me growing up, that I have, like, there's a part of me that's working differently. I don't hold thoughts that rigidly, and I don't have to. I'm actually more receptive and available for the
Mhm.
conversation, and then I don't have to hold the thought and have those, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, oh, I want to have a good conversation, better make note. You can make notes too. I mean, I think that you can do all kinds of things, and nothing is wrong or right. But I'm saying that, like, forgetting things, or not thinking while versus not thinking, and versus just letting it go, is a really valuable exercise, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad that we're, talking about this. And I mean, we have a lot of things we want to talk about,
Yeah.
listening. This is just one of the few, but
Yeah.
uh,
Or first of many.
yeah, for sure, right, many.
uh, yeah, actually, what you're saying though, I appreciated this conversation. There's several times in it that I had not quite an aha moment, but just like a spark kind of go in my mind, like, oh yeah, like there's two or three times. I can't even remember what they were now, but to confirm that this is an important conversation to have.
Mhm.
This particular one that we're having today, but also this conversation about listening.
Yeah.
This podcast is very timely, beautiful, needed.
Mhm.
Other people do need to listen to
Mhm.
this podcast. I think it'll be valuable for other people.
Mhm. I think this is a good,
Ending point. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
We hope you enjoy this podcast. Please share, subscribe, and leave us your comments. Till next time.